batteries have a long history of pretty slow improvement on the order of 4 to 5% a year. I think we're one of the few companies that are actually trying to do something pretty revolutionary in the space.
This week, the Silicon Valley startup building batteries to power not just cars, but trains, planes, and everything else in between.
Our mission right now is to get these batteries on the road, try to really transform the automotive sector, and in the process, really make a dent on CO2 emissions.
And from the disruptors to the big players who want a piece of the electric vehicle pie, how Volkswagen is throwing its hat into the ring to be the EV champion.
So far it's going well. EVs have won the race. All competitors are basically following us. So we feel confident.
Plus, cities are on the front lines of climate change and on the front page of the new edition of Bloomberg Green magazine. We'll speak with editor Aaron Rutkoff about plugging batteries straight into the grid. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. Batteries are an old technology, more than 200 years old, and they can be remarkably simple. We probably all learned how to make a potato clock at school. I certainly did. But with the creation and refinement of the lithium-ion battery over the last half-century, they have evolved from powering small things like flashlights to slightly bigger things like flashy cars. And now we have a problem. We're reaching the limits of what these batteries can do. So from how they work to the companies trying to make them better, here's a look at the next generation of battery technology.
Advances in battery design over the past few decades have made modern technology possible. But it's not enough. We need better, cheaper, more energy-dense batteries if we're going to make electric cars ubiquitous and save the planet. Now companies are on the verge of battery breakthroughs that could change the world.
The battery industry has been kind of stuck making batteries one way for like 50 years, and we think it's just time for that to change.
A battery looks like a black box, quite literally sometimes. But inside it is a very complex mixture of chemicals. There are 4 components. There are 2 electrodes, cathode and anode. There's a separator, and then there's a liquid electrolyte typically. And the electrolyte's job is to be able to shuttle ions between the 2 electrodes. And that's what charges the battery, and that's what allows the battery to be then discharged and produce power. Among the everyday technologies, batteries are perhaps one of the oldest, because batteries were invented even before electricity was invented, which is to say, there was no way to generate electricity until somebody made a battery. And that was back in 1799 by an Italian scientist named Volta. And what he created was actually called a voltaic pile. It wasn't even called a battery back then. And it was called a pile because it was literally a pile of 2 different types of metal, in this case copper and zinc, separated by typically a piece of cardboard.
Batteries have come a long way since the voltaic pile, but they're still made up of the 4 basic components: anode, cathode, separator, and electrolyte. The current state-of-the-art lithium-ion battery is small, light, and relatively powerful, making everything from mobile devices to electric cars possible. But in order to make decarbonization a reality, batteries need to get much, much better.
We are quite far away from the limits of what a battery can do. Among the different things about batteries that still need to be improved is not just the amount of energy they can store, but they also have to do it safely. Batteries also need to be charged more quickly. And finally, batteries still aren't cheap enough. They probably need to be half the price to be able to compete with the gasoline-powered engine.
To accomplish all that, a number of companies are going inside the black box and tinkering with those 4 basic components, hoping to jumpstart the next generation of batteries.
Batteries have a long history of pretty slow improvement on the order of 4 to 5% a year. I think we're one of the few companies that are actually trying to do something pretty revolutionary in the space.
Harold Rust's company, Enovix, based just south of San Francisco, is making one seemingly small tweak to the lithium-ion battery, replacing the anode, typically made of carbon, with silicon.
So the major advantage of silicon is it has 3 times the energy density of carbon, which it replaces. So that allows you to pack more stuff in your battery and drive up energy density. But silicon, while it's a great anode, suffers from a bunch of problems, the biggest of which is the fact that it expands 300%.
That's a potentially battery-busting problem. But Enovix claims to have found a solution. A complex method of arranging the battery's components that keeps the silicon under pressure.
It allows us to basically manage that swelling without any macroscopic growth of the battery.
A silicon anode battery could store about 50% more energy than what's currently on the market, which could mean we'll be seeing lighter electronics with longer battery life in the near future.
We've been actively sampling batteries over the last 2 years to customers. We're sitting in a room now where we're starting to assemble our first production line, and right now we're targeting, first deliveries towards the end of this year.
Elsewhere in Silicon Valley, another company is working on an even more ambitious battery design.
We started with the mission of trying to narrow the gap between combustion engine-based vehicles and EVs, and we recognized that the key there was to build a better battery. We could usher in a new era of transportation. 15-minute charge times, better life performance, and even lower costs. Turns out all those problems can be addressed if you just switch from a carbon or carbon silicon anode to a lithium metal anode.
Usually, the lithium in lithium-ion batteries only refers to the molecule shuttling between the cathode and anode. Making the anode itself out of lithium could double the energy density of the battery, a much bigger leap than a silicon anode battery like Enovix's.
So typically inside a battery, the electrolyte is liquid, but a liquid electrolyte for a lithium metal battery causes the lithium metal to degrade and sometimes even short and catch fire. QuantumScape's main goal was to try and replace what is a liquid electrolyte inside the battery with a solid electrolyte.
It's literally a solid material, it's a ceramic material, but it's kind of a very special material because lithium ions can just zip right through it like they're on a highway.
This single pouch cell is all QuantumScape was able to show us of their solid-state battery. Ultimately, they'll stack 100 of these together to make a complete battery pack. The company is still a few years from selling a commercial product, but the performance improvements they're predicting would be revolutionary.
We think that with these batteries, you're going to be able to get EVs that compete more effectively with combustion engine-based vehicles. So you get more energy density, you have lower cost and longer life. So our mission right now is to get these batteries on the road, try to really transform the automotive sector, and in the process really make a dent on CO2 emissions.
Companies like QuantumScape and Enovix are imagining a future in which clean, affordable EVs dominate the roads. But the implications go much further than that. Better batteries are key to almost every technology that could slow down climate change.
Batteries are what are known as an enabling technology. So currently, our batteries can go in electric cars, but there's still a battery that needs to go in a truck. Then there needs to be a battery that goes in a ship, and then there needs to be a battery that could go in a plane. There are now bigger and bigger batteries being put on the grid that help us increase the amount of renewables we consume. And all those things get a boost with every little innovation that happens in batteries. And so the impact that batteries can have is immense.
The immense impact of batteries is being felt across the corporate world. The latest issue of the Bloomberg Green magazine touches on that. Editor Aaron Rutkoff will join the program to talk more about QuantumScape's big leap forward. Plus, our interview with VW CEO Herbert Diess as the German car maker pushes to be a battery titan. This is Bloomberg Green. This is Bloomberg Green. I'm Jennifer Zabasanja in New York with your Green Brief.
Joe Biden isn't coming for your hamburgers or steak. That's the message from Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. He says reports that the White House will crack down on meat consumption to meet its climate goals simply aren't true. The uproar started after a Daily Mail article said Americans could have to cut 90% of red meat from their diets. Fox News picked up the story but has since corrected its report, saying that's not part of the president's plan. As many as 1 in 5 wells worldwide is at risk of running dry if groundwater levels drop even by a few meters. That's the finding of a new study published in the journal Science. Wells supply drinking water for billions of people around the world, as well as agriculture. And oil giant ExxonMobil is under fire over its climate goals. Activist investor Engine Number One says the firm's targets are disingenuous, as greenhouse gas emissions will actually be higher in 2025 than they were in 2010. Exxon says it supports the aims of the Paris Agreement and efforts to get to net zero emissions. And that's your Green Brief. Anne-Marie?
Thanks, Jen. Billions of people carry around a lithium-ion battery daily in their mobile phones. But in the last decade, the Nobel Prize-winning invention has started to transform more than just the consumer electronics space. And the most recent issue of the Bloomberg Green magazine touches on the latest advances in the technology. Editor Aaron Rutkoff joins me now. Aaron, we were introduced earlier in the program to the team behind QuantumScape. And in the magazine, the founder talks about the idea behind building better batteries when he was actually behind a Tesla. So what makes this startup so cutting edge?
So when you're driving a Tesla or you're holding your iPhone, that's lithium-ion technology. What QuantumScape is promising is a breakthrough that's been eluding scientists and researchers for decades, which is the solid-state battery. To get there, you had to replace a lot of the components that have been with us in lithium-ion technology for 30 years. And if you're able to do that, what you can get is a battery that charges much faster, up to 50% faster than what we do today, and just has a far larger range. The other really interesting thing about QuantumScape, of course, is that their biggest partner is Volkswagen. So if they can figure out how to mass produce these new batteries, it will immediately enter, a lot of cars. But that's still years away.
The magazine also takes us around the world, really. A lot of insight into how cities are changing. Cities are so vulnerable when it comes to climate change. Is that why they are the ones on the front lines and the quickest to change?
I think that's right. I mean, if you look at the way that cities have developed historically, they're often on coastlines, and that's one of the first ways that we're going to be vulnerable to rising sea levels. Also, just because of the number of people that live in cities, the kind of structural changes that are needed to protect populations in terms of cooling down temperatures or providing drinking water mean that cities are some of the first places that we get to experiment with climate solutions. And around the world, we're really finding that to be the case, that the vulnerability that is part of city life breeds this kind of laboratory for climate solutions.
What about the electrification of city grids? What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, that's something that's really exciting about cities, right, is that you are able to bring forth some of the electrified transportation faster because cities are smaller, there's smaller distances to get around, and with the huge installations in solar power that we've seen over the last year is something the pandemic didn't even slow down, was the pace of solar installations. That means that cities can really speed up the process of becoming electrified faster.
Another very visually striking piece in the magazine is about thermography. What exactly is the technology and how will it be used to fight climate change?
So we sent a photographer around London with a camera that's able to show the heat and energy loss from buildings. And that's actually one of the biggest parts of what it'll mean to transform cities for the climate era, is taking buildings and making sure that they're more heat and energy efficient so that there's less energy needed to keep cities running. And what you see when you turn cameras on even very modern new buildings in London, you can just see where all of the energy and heat comes out of these buildings. And that process of remaking our built environment so that it's more efficient for the future is something that's going to be extremely expensive and very exciting about the way cities grow in the next chapter.
Aaron, thanks so much for joining us. Aaron Rutkoff, editor of the Bloomberg Green magazine. From startups changing the game to an established name trying to get in on the action, Volkswagen produced more cars than any other company in 2020. And now the German automaker wants to expand that dominance into the electric space. It's targeting 1 million EV sales this year and to be the global market leader by 2025. CEO Herbert Diess spoke to our Matt Miller about the company's electric dreams.
We need to scale up batteries, but we are good until 25 or so. We are heavily investing in fast charging, which is probably the biggest constraint on the customer front because of range anxiety still. There are some regions in Europe which are well covered. Germany is growing, but other regions we are really lagging behind, like Spain or Italy, and this is where our investment mostly goes. Mostly it goes into fast charging, and we're providing home charging devices. But step by step, we see that the situation will alleviate, and I would say we ramp up in parallel, battery capacity, EV capacity, and fast charging capacity. So far, it's going well. And we see, actually, EVs have won the race. All competitors are basically following us. So we feel confident.
How long will you keep the internal combustion business? I mean, I know you want to have 50 electric car models by 2030. Am I still going to be able to buy a 911 with a gasoline engine?
You should be able to buy still. I think this transition will probably last 2 life cycles or so until 35 or probably even longer. It depends a lot on the regional strategies and policies. And also I have to say, electrification doesn't make sense in every environment because, electrification only works for CO2 reduction on the basis that the primary energy is CO2 free. So you either use sun or solar or hydro. And that is why we assume that the regions will have different speeds in transition. Now Europe has really taken over. With a strong push now with the new administration in the United States as well. China keep on pushing, but there might be regions which only come probably 5, 10, 15 years later.
Coming up, as countries ramp up their climate ambitions, they're missing one key ingredient: the batteries to power them. What will it take to fuel the electric revolution? This is Bloomberg Green.
We're also really interested in developing a full-on supply chain. You see that in the American Jobs Plan as well, to be able to mine responsibly, of course, for critical materials that we know we've got beneath the surface of so many pockets of this country, whether it's lithium or cobalt. The bottom line is we can do that.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. If world leaders want to step up their green ambitions, they need more than just solar panels, carbon-free cars, and wind turbines. They need the batteries to power them. Even though prices have plummeted and production has soared in the past decade, it's going to take a lot more to power an electric future. Joining us now is Dan Steingart. He's the Stanley Thompson Associate Professor of Chemical Metallurgy at Columbia University and has 20 years of experience studying and developing batteries. His work has been adopted by various industries and has led to several electrochemical energy-related startups. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. First, give us a sense of what you do. What is chemical metallurgy?
Chemical metallurgy is strictly the study of how metals form and how the formation of metals affects their performance. So classically, it started with steel, and when our ancestors created the first iron derivatives, they would cook it over a fire, and they noticed if they cooked the metal over a fire differently, it would have different properties. And so as we got better at understanding the science behind why materials behave the way they did, chemical metallurgists applied that to making metals better. And now the relative of that, or the modern ancestor of that, is a battery scientist.
So you have a lot of experience in metals and in batteries. The big problem with batteries right now, or one of the problems, is the price. How do we make batteries cheaper?
The way we drop the price of batteries is the way we drop the price of any other commodity. We take out the expensive minerals and we put in less expensive minerals, and then we beat down the cost of purifying those materials as low as possible. 10 years ago, it was unclear to a lot of people in the field, including me, I got to be honest here, that the lithium-ion battery would be able to hit the prices that we're seeing today. There was an inflection point just a few years ago, and now it's really a matter of when and not if. It's super exciting.
We need batteries, of course, for electric vehicles and autos. What's the time scale of getting those specific types of batteries down? Is it still 15 years?
Oh no, that's happening now, and many would argue that it's already happened. For shorter range or moderate range, I would say we're there. Within the next 5 years, we're going to see drops that push the range to about 250 miles or so. And then the big question is can we get to true parity at 400 to 500 miles with a $20,000 to $30,000 car? That is our stretch goal. I think that will happen by 2035. It may happen as soon as 2026 if you look at some of the aggressive projections coming out of Volkswagen.
So for autos, it's really about the mileage. What about outside of the automobile industry? Trucks, ships, planes, where are we with those types of batteries?
That's much trickier. The cost reductions in autos have made big inroads into trucking, where 10 years ago it seemed that the best way of electrifying trucks for moderate to long haul was clearly going to be hydrogen fuel cells. The line has shifted a bit, and so now we're seeing batteries have some advantages, and maybe they will be dominant in the trucking industry. That's wait and see. For aviation, it's much harder. For 500-mile flights, again, it always comes down to range. So for 500-mile flights or less, some of my former students are working on these types of innovations, and they think it's possible. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think a transatlantic flight powered by batteries may never happen. A hydrogen fuel cell or some sort of fuel cell will probably be necessary to aid that, although there are people that would vehemently disagree with me on that. Where people don't disagree is shipping. Shipping is really quite difficult, and a battery, even in its thermodynamic limit, is going to have a hard time getting across the ocean. Basically, the entire ship would have to be filled with batteries. So you can do it, but the purpose of the ship would be severely mitigated. So for shipping fuels, as we try to electrify that, it's going to be hydrogen and hydrogen complexes, probably ammonia. It seems to be the front runner right now, and there's a lot of effort to push the shipping industry towards ammonia-based fuels with some sort of hydrogen fuel cell in the chain.
So there's a blueprint ahead. The new creations we also are going to see with batteries also means a lot more potential waste. What's the incentive for the industry right now to make sure that these batteries are recycled properly?
There's a real catch-22 there, because as we transition to these low-cost minerals, the incentive to recycle them is lowered. We have to create the technologies to get it done. I think that's very possible. The policy and initial capital to get that done, because this is very thin margins, and it's only really going to work at volume. So how we get there is a tough question. It's not a technology question. It's a matter of political will. It's a matter of patient capital, and then honest engineers grinding it out and making it happen.
That does it for this week's edition, but keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.